Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen.
And I'm Paul Carter.
And we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, we're excited for this one.
I think a lot of you are going to find this one particularly fascinating, maybe even a little perplexing.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to be talking about the translation of the Book of Mormon.
That's right.
And we're going to be looking at what the church teaches. We're going to examine accounts from people who are actually there.
Yeah.
And see if those things align or maybe where they don't.
Yeah, it's a topic that really gets to the heart of our beliefs as Latter-day Saints.
For sure.
Not just the how, but also the why of translation.
Right.
And we've got some really interesting sources lined up for today.
Yeah. What have we got?
We're going to be looking at the LDS.org essays, of course.
Of course.
We've also got some firsthand accounts that have been compiled by the BYU Religious Studies Center.
Oh, very cool.
Also some responses from FAIR.
Okay.
And then we'll look at some contrasting points from the CES Letter Rebuttal.
All right, so we're coming at this from all different angles. And what we're hoping to do today is give you a clearer, maybe a more nuanced understanding of how the Book of Mormon came about.
That's right.
So to kick things off, can you just remind us of that core narrative that I think most Latter-day Saints are familiar with?
Sure.
That official church explanation, if you will, of how the translation happened?
Yeah, so the church really emphasizes that the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God.
Okay.
And in the LDS.org essay called Book of Mormon Translation, it specifically states that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon with the aid of sacred instruments prepared by God.
Right. And those instruments are the Urim and Thummim.
Exactly.
Which we often see in artwork and we hear about in church teachings.
Yeah, and that same essay goes on to describe the Urim and Thummim as two transparent stones set in silver rims. And they were fastened to a breastplate.
Okay.
And the essay really emphasizes that they were meant to receive revelations and translate languages.
And I think for many of us, when we think about that translation process, it's almost inseparable from the idea of the witnesses.
Absolutely.
The 3 and the 8 witnesses who claim to have seen the plates or even held them in their hands.
That's right. And the church places a lot of emphasis on those testimonies.
Right.
There's an essay called Witnesses of the Book of Mormon Plates.
Okay.
And it actually quotes the divine law of witnesses from the Bible.
Which is that?
In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established.
Oh, I remember that.
And then it connects that idea directly to the multiple witnesses of the plates, saying that their testimonies are powerful and consistent, even in the smallest details.
Yeah, it's powerful to think about these men.
Yeah.
So closely associated with Joseph Smith, having these experiences. And it seems like what the church is saying is, look, these were ordinary people.
Yeah.
Some of whom even later had disagreements with Joseph.
Right.
But even they couldn't deny what they had seen and felt.
Right. That's a really key point.
Yeah.
And the essay even addresses that some of the witnesses left the church.
Right.
But it emphasizes that none of them ever denied his testimony that they had seen the plates.
That they had that experience.
That's right. And it argues that their willingness to stand by their testimonies, despite their conflicts or disaffection with the church, really strengthens their credibility.
Okay, so we've got the official narrative.
Yeah.
Divine instruments, the Urim and Thummim, used by Joseph Smith to translate ancient records.
Right.
And backing it up, the unwavering testimonies and multiple witnesses who saw and handled the plates. But are there other details, maybe even from the people who were there, that add further layers to the story?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where those firsthand accounts compiled by BYU Religious Studies Center become really valuable. Because they offer glimpses into the daily life surrounding the translation, often through the eyes of those closest to Joseph.
Like, for example?
Well, let's take Emma Smith's account. She describes how Joseph would dictate the translation while looking into a seer stone.
Wait, a seer stone? Is that something different from the Urim and Thummim?
It is.
Okay.
And this is where the narrative gets a little more complex.
Okay.
This particular seer stone, sometimes referred to as the chocolate-colored stone, actually predates the Book of Mormon plates.
Really?
Yeah, the essay from the Church History Department titled Joseph the seer, explains that it was found years earlier while Joseph was helping to dig a well.
Interesting.
And according to Emma, this was actually the instrument he most frequently used.
So if he's using this seer stone for the translation,
Yeah.
where do the gold plates even fit in?
Right.
Were they even necessary?
That's a question that has sparked a lot of discussion.
And we'll get to that discussion. But first, can you just tell us a little bit more about the seer stone? What did Emma say about it?
She described the stone as not exactly black, but rather a dark color. And she explained that Joseph would put the seer stone into his hat.
Into his hat?
Yeah, and then put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light.
Wow, okay.
And it was while he was doing this that he would dictate the words of the Book of Mormon.
So we have this really fascinating detail coming directly from Joseph Smith's wife.
Right.
That adds another dimension to our understanding of this process. It's not the picture a lot of us might have in our minds of how this worked.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, how does this fit with the official narrative that we were talking about earlier?
Right.
Does the church acknowledge the use of the seer stone?
They do.
Okay.
In fact, the essay Joseph the Seer explicitly acknowledges that Joseph Smith used a seer stone to view the words of the Book of Mormon translation.
Okay.
It even includes pictures of the seer stone.
Oh, wow. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they're not shying away from this information.
So it seems like they're willing to embrace the complexity. But how do they reconcile the use of the seer stone with the Urim and Thummim?
Yeah.
Weren't they both meant for translation?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're going to explore further as we kind of delve into these firsthand accounts.
Okay.
And look at perspectives from FAIR and the CES Letter Rebuttal.
Right.
It's important to remember that these different aspects of the translation process don't necessarily contradict each other.
Okay.
They might just offer a fuller, more nuanced understanding of how the Book of Mormon came to be.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
Yes.
We've got the official narrative, the witness accounts, and now this detail about the seer stone.
Right.
And each piece is adding a new layer of understanding and prompting even more questions as we go.
Absolutely.
So in that spirit of inquiry and open-mindedness, we'll continue our deep dive into the translation of the Book of Mormon.
That's right. Okay, so we've laid that foundation. You know, the church's teachings on divine instruments, the powerful testimonies of the witnesses, and that intriguing detail of Joseph using a seer stone.
Right, and that brings us to a pretty important question, I think, that we kind of touched on earlier. What was the purpose of the plates?
Right.
If they weren't directly used in the translating?
Yeah, it seems like we have these divinely provided instruments for translation.
Right.
The Urim and Thummim. But then we also have these accounts, including Emma's, describing Joseph using a seer stone that he found years before.
Years before, So
it makes you wonder if the plates were more about symbolism than functionality.
Yeah, almost like a prop.
And that's definitely a perspective that some people have put forward, particularly those who question the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. The CES letter, for instance, argues that the plates were a convenient prop meant to add credibility to Joseph's claims.
But how do faithful Latter-day Saints kind of reconcile the use of the seer stone with the existence of the Urim and Thummim?
Right.
And where do the plates fit into all of this?
Yeah. Well, FAIR offers some interesting insights here.
Okay.
They acknowledge that the translation process, as described by those who were there, might seem unconventional to modern readers.
Okay.
But they argue that we shouldn't impose our own expectations on how God works.
So it's not about trying to make it fit into a neat and tidy box, but rather accepting that God can work in ways that maybe we don't fully understand.
Exactly. And they point out that the Book of Mormon itself mentions the Urim and Thummim being used for translation.
Okay,
So they suggest that perhaps Joseph used both instruments, maybe even at different stages of the process. And they also emphasize that the plates, regardless of their role in the mechanics of translation, served as a tangible witness to the reality of an ancient record.
Almost like a physical representation.
Yes.
Even if they weren't used letter by letter in the translation.
Exactly.
Their presence was still very important.
Yeah, because remember, those who handled the plates testified that they felt their weight, the engravings, the reality of their physical existence. And that experience regardless of the mechanics of translation,
Right.
would have been incredibly profound.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're starting to see how these different pieces of the puzzle might fit together.
Right, we've got the divine instruments potentially used in various ways, the physical plates serving as this kind of tangible anchor to the divine, and then Joseph acting as the instrument through which the translation flowed, often facilitated by the seer stone.
It's a multifaceted process.
Yeah, he did.
And one that I think really invites us to consider the role of faith and personal revelation.
Yeah.
You know, we can analyze the historical details, we can debate the mechanics, but ultimately, I think the power of the Book of Mormon rests on its ability to touch hearts and change lives.
And that's a good point, because speaking of those who were touched by this experience, we can't really ignore the role of the witnesses.
Right.
And we talked earlier about how important their testimonies are for the church's narrative.
Right.
But their accounts have been scrutinized.
Yeah.
Sometimes even criticized.
That's right.
For inconsistencies or changing details over time.
And this is where both FAIR and the CES letter offer valuable but kind of contrasting perspectives.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure.
What are those key points of contention when it comes to the witness testimonies?
Well, the CES letter, as you might expect, focuses on those inconsistencies.
Okay.
They highlight instances where the witnesses, years after their initial testimonies, provided slightly different descriptions of the plates or the angel or even the overall experience. And they argue that these discrepancies cast doubt on the reliability of the testimonies as a whole.
So they're essentially saying if the details change over time, it suggests that maybe the whole thing was just made up or exaggerated.
That's basically their argument.
Okay.
And they also point to the fact that some of the witnesses, including all three of the three witnesses, eventually left the church.
They did.
And the CES letter suggests that this departure further undermines their credibility.
It's a fair point. I mean, if these men were willing to leave the very church that was founded on this book that they claim to have witnessed come forth.
Right.
Doesn't that raise questions about their original testimonies?
It does for some people, but FAIR presents a different interpretation.
Okay.
They argue that memory is complex.
Okay.
It's subject to the passage of time, individual perception.
For sure.
And they point out that even in eyewitness accounts of, you know, very mundane events, there are often variations in detail.
Right. That makes sense.
So they're saying just because the details might differ slightly, it doesn't mean the core experience was untrue.
Right. Okay.
And they emphasize that despite those variations, all of the witnesses maintain the fundamental truth of their testimony, which is they saw the plates either physically or in vision, and that they believed the Book of Mormon to be a divine work.
So it sounds like a lot of it comes down to how we interpret those variations.
Yeah.
I mean, is it possible for someone to have a genuine spiritual experience?
Right.
And yet still misremember certain details years later?
That's a question each listener has to grapple with.
Yeah, it is.
And it speaks to the complexity of human experience
Yeah.
and the role of faith in accepting something that we didn't personally witness.
And I think it highlights the importance of looking at those multiple perspectives.
Right.
We've got the CES letter emphasizing those inconsistencies,
Yeah.
questioning the witness's reliability, and we have FAIR acknowledging those variations, but arguing that they don't negate the core truth of those testimonies.
Exactly.
So ultimately, it's up to each of us to kind of weigh that evidence and come to our own conclusions.
Absolutely.
What feels more compelling to you?
Right.
Is it the idea that these men were either deliberately deceiving people or that they were just completely mistaken? Or is it the possibility that they had this genuine experience, the memory of which may be evolved over time?
Yeah, it's a very thought-provoking question.
It is.
And it kind of leads us to, I think, another layer of this translation narrative, which is the role of personal revelation and spiritual confirmation.
Because even if we accept the historical accounts, even if we believe the witnesses, the question still remains. How do we know if the Book of Mormon is truly what it claims to be?
Right.
This divine record translated by the power of God.
That's a very personal question.
It is.
It goes beyond historical evidence and really delves into the realm of faith and individual experience.
So it's not just about the external evidence. But it's also about cultivating an internal witness. That feeling of knowing that resonates in our own souls.
Exactly. And for many Latter-day Saints, the answer lies in personal revelation.
Okay.
They testify that they've felt the power of the Book of Mormon in their own lives, that they've received spiritual confirmation of its truthfulness.
So it's not just about what others have said or what we read in history books.
Yeah.
It's about what we feel and experience for ourselves.
Right. And for those seeking that confirmation, the invitation is always open.
And where would they go to seek that?
Well, the Book of Mormon itself encourages readers to ask God, the Eternal Father, in the name of Christ, if these things are not true.
Okay.
And if you shall ask with a sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ, he will manifest the truth of it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost.
It's a powerful invitation.
It is.
It acknowledges the role of agency and personal revelation as we kind of navigate these questions of faith.
And that seems particularly relevant to our deep dive today. We've explored the historical details, the witness accounts, the complexity surrounding the seer stone. But ultimately, the question of whether or not we accept the Book of Mormon as a divine record rests on individual discernment and a willingness to seek personal confirmation.
I love that.
It's been a really insightful journey so far.
It has.
We've unpacked the church's narrative. We've examined the role of the seer stone, explored those witness testimonies, and really grappled with the complexities surrounding the translation process.
And as we move into the final part of our deep dive today, we'll delve into some of the more nuanced aspects. We'll be examining some specific passages from the Book of Mormon itself.
Sounds fascinating.
And considering how they might inform our understanding of its origins.
I can't wait.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we?
We really have.
Exploring all these different layers of this translation of the Book of Mormon. We've looked at the church's narrative. We've delved into those firsthand accounts. We've even grappled with those, complexities surrounding the witnesses, the use of the seer stone.
Absolutely.
It's been a journey.
It has been a fascinating journey.
It really has.
And I think as we kind of wrap up our exploration here, it's worth circling back to that core question that I think is probably sitting in a lot of listeners' minds. Which is, does any of this impact the spiritual significance of the Book of Mormon? Does knowing about the seer stone, the potential inconsistencies in the witness accounts, even the possibility that Joseph Smith was influenced by his environment, does any of that change the power of the book itself?
That's a really big question. And I think for some people, especially those who have maybe held a very literal view of the translation process, this might feel unsettling.
It can.
It challenges that traditional narrative that they've always believed.
Absolutely. And it's okay to feel that discomfort. It's part of the process of growth and deeper understanding. But I think it's crucial to remember that the power of the Book of Mormon doesn't solely reside in the mechanics of its translation. It lies in its message, its teachings, its ability to connect with the human soul on a spiritual level.
So you're saying that even if we wrestle with those historical complexities, the spiritual essence of the book can remain intact.
Exactly. The Book of Mormon invites us to live a more Christ-centered life, to act with compassion and love, to seek truth and righteousness. And those principles, they resonate so deeply within the human heart.
Yeah, they do.
Regardless of how we interpret the book's historical origins.
And for so many Latter-day Saints, the Book of Mormon is a source of personal revelation.
Absolutely.
It leads to these profound spiritual experiences. And they've felt the Spirit confirm its truthfulness to them, regardless of any of those external debates or historical complexities.
That personal witness, that internal confirmation, that is at the heart of faith.
It is.
And it can coexist alongside intellectual inquiry and a willingness to grapple with these challenging questions.
So as we kind of come to the end of our deep dive here, what does all of this mean for us? What are the takeaways?
Well, I think it encourages us to approach the Book of Mormon and really all matters of faith with both our hearts and our minds.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We can embrace the beauty of its message while also acknowledging the complexities surrounding its origins. We can seek personal revelation while also engaging in thoughtful study and analysis.
It's a good reminder that faith isn't about blind acceptance. It's about this continuous journey of seeking and learning and growing.
I think this deep dive has highlighted that beautifully.
I think so too.
We've explored multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
We've wrestled with these really tough questions.
Uh-huh.
And ultimately, we've been invited to come to our own conclusions.
That's powerful.
About what the Book of Mormon means to us.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it has enriched your understanding of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And its origins.
And as you continue your own personal exploration,
Yeah.
just remember, the journey of faith, it's a lifelong adventure.
It is.
One filled with wonder and complexity.
So true.
Embrace the journey, seek truth with an open heart and an open mind.
Yeah.
And allow the Book of Mormon, regardless of its origins, to speak to your soul.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.